Okay, sorry everybody. I didn't realize that I would reach a max time at any point. I also didn't realize I was talking for so long, so I'll try to hurry up for the rest of it. All right, so we'll continue with my little part two here. So I'm pretty much done with this slide. I do just want to add, though, that if any of you are interested in reading more about this idea, I actually read a really great paper on this a couple weeks ago about how teachers affect their students by like how much they invest in them and how much they expect of them and how they reward their behavior and so on and all of these sorts of behaviors that teachers kind of put into their students and how that affects students long term. And this is actually the paper right here, The Persistence of Teacher Effects in Elementary Grades by Konstantopoulos and Chung. So anyway, that's a great article to read. I strongly suggest it if you want to read more about this topic. Okay, so we'll move on to the third point, which is about the math and science gender gap and the fact that it's getting smaller. So this was kind of a positive thing, and this is a positive thing. I talked a little bit previously about, of course, the gap in minority representation in STEM, and it is definitely still a big issue, and there is still a pretty pervasive gap, but that gap is closing, which is great news, but we do still see kind of this gap in STEM representation and also in high stakes tests such as the SAT and ACT. We see that males continue to outscore females on math and science and the ACT, and then also on the SAT. We actually, this article reported that males were outscoring females in math and verbal portions of the SAT. And we're seeing that girls are taking more AP classes and exams, which is great, but we're still finding that boys are performing more highly in these courses and on these exams. So definitely a problem that we need to be looking at and addressing, which is going to bring me to another article that I definitely suggest reading, which is a great one by Jamieson and Harkins, written in 2007, and it is about stereotype threat. So stereotype threat is a really interesting thing to look at regarding the STEM representation gap, and just kind of understanding how girls and minority groups kind of are told throughout much of their K through 12 education and throughout their life, kind of that they're supposed to be more of the inferior group when it comes to learning in STEM fields and subjects, and that actually influences their ability to learn later. So this was a really interesting study that was done with eye tracking, which is really cool. So this bar graph on the right side, the NST, that is no stereotype, and then the ST is stereotype threat. So basically we just see that when males and females don't feel any sort of stereotype threat, they're actually performing equally when they're doing, this was actually a spatial task, a visuospatial task, which is something that, again, we usually see men performing better than women, or we would expect men to perform better than women. So this is a spatial task, but we actually see them performing equally when there is no sort of stereotype threat involved. But then on the left side, we see with the stereotype threat, we actually see females performing more poorly than the men on the spatial task. So this is a very interesting article. Also, I suggest reading about this topic. And we can move to point number 2, which is about a new gender gap existing in technology. So this is definitely kind of, this is involved in STEM, but we kind of always have typically looked at it just in science and math. But definitely the gap in technology is growing and becoming, a much greater issue because we see that boys gain more computer experience than girls, and we also see girls rating themselves as having significantly lower technological ability than boys. And we also just see generally in technology fields that there is a lot of gender stereotyping, that it is a common theme in technology subjects, courses, and careers. And lost my cursor. Okay. So we will move to our last point, which is just that uh, surprisingly, some political forces are intent on reversing many of the gains in educational equity made during the past decade. So something that the author stated, which I think is very interesting, and the way a lot of us feel and want to feel, but it's just not always very true. He stated that we thought that armed with knowledge, people would want to change. Not so simple. So this is just the idea that sometimes it's just not enough to show people the numbers and to kind of make this problem seem very real and show them how pervasive it is, because there just appears to be some forces that are just intent on pushing back against educational equity kind of at every turn. And something else the author talked about was just how we see that, because we see regularly that people who lack the qualifications to make claims about researchers who do have qualifications are are making claims about those researchers, that are definitely negative and that are having a negative effect on educational equity. And these statements have lasting effects that society and culture pick up on and hold on to for a very long time. So I'm just going to end with one last little thing to hit it home. The author ended with this. I think this was very interesting, but in a study that was done, I believe it was done in 1995, several students received a sociology of gender course syllabus, and the first syllabus that students were provided with, there was a fiction. The whole class was fictional, and there was a fictional woman teaching the class. And students reported that they thought the class was biased, had a political agenda, it was not factual, or the teacher was not qualified to teach this course. And then we found when students provided the same exact syllabus, the same exact class, everything exactly the same, except that the professor was now a male. There were much more positive comments provided. They had much more positive beliefs related to the course. They thought the professor was well qualified to teach the course. They had much less problems with it. And then with the majority of those changes of comments coming from male students. So I think that's, an interesting little study that maybe kind of hits all of these points home. So now I just have a couple questions that I'm going to pose to you guys that maybe we can talk about. I love to talk about this subject, so I'd love to just leave it open, and any comments and questions and concerns and anything you want to discuss, please feel free to do that. I would be happy to reply and we can just kind of talk about it. Or you can talk specifically about an example when you have experienced or you think there is a potential to experience gender bias in your classroom. And then I want you to really dig and think about if you would notice it. And if you do notice it, will you address it? And then if you choose to address it, how will you address it? So I think those are really important things for all of us to consider. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. Sorry this took so long.